Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Good morning and welcome to this episode of the Best Little Town Podcast. My name is Bart Warner. I am the town manager for the town of Bedford, speaking to you on Wednesday, January 15th, at a little bit after 10:30 a.m. to provide a recap of the activities of your town government, specifically the town council. Do this after every council meeting on a regular basis. And we had one of those just last night. But prior to that, back on January 2nd, we did have an election this past fall, and we have 3 new council members and 1 returning member. And after those elections take place, council has an organizational meeting. Bedford is a little different in some places in that our mayor is not directly elected by the public. Our citizens elect a council and they choose a mayor from within, and that happens at the first organizational meeting after each election. That meeting took place on January the 2nd. And since one of the people who rolled off council was former Mayor Tim Black, that position was open. And that has been assumed by Mr. C.G. Stanley, who took office as mayor effective January 2nd. Darrell Updike was elected vice mayor. And so last night, January 14th, was the first meeting of our newly constituted council and was the first meeting led by Mayor Stanley, who did an outstanding job of keeping things moving and ran a very efficient meeting, which we very much appreciate. We'll jump right into the agenda from last night. Of course, I typically open the meeting after the approval of minutes from previous meetings with my report to council. Last night, I reminded council that back in June, the town council then adopted an ordinance which included a $5 increase in customer charges for certain electric tariff groups. Per the terms of that ordinance, that increase went into effect January 1st, 2025. Now, there was a little bit of, confusion on the part of the organization. During the discussion of that ordinance, there was some talk about deferring that fee until such time as we could conduct an electric rate study. However, in reviewing the minutes of that meeting and the official ordinance that was adopted, the ordinance that was actually adopted did not capture that condition. So in a lot of our tariff classes, you will be seeing a $5 increase on your electric bill. We regret that, but as people are probably well aware, there are several things going on with our economy, including inflation, and as a business, like any other business, unfortunately, the town electric utility is not immune to that. However, with regard to the rate study, we have since June contracted with a consulting firm known as Raftellus, and they have begun work on evaluating our electric rates and our electric regulations and our tariffs. And they are currently working with town staff to obtain the data they are required to produce that report. So, although the intent, I think, was to tie the increase with that study, both are kind of happening in conjunction. As most folks know, we've had some winter weather over the past couple of weeks. I did give a shout out to my colleagues with town staff, particularly Public Works, Electric, and our police department for their efforts recovering from the freezing rain and ice event that occurred overnight on January 5th. We did receive a couple of comments and questions, and those are always welcome. There was a little confusion, I think, maybe amongst citizens about our recovery time and our reaction to that event. And this one was different. Without kind of overly explaining things, snow events we are very well acquainted with, and we do well at getting snow off the roads. Ice is an altogether different proposition for us, and particularly when coupled with freezing rain, it's just a much more challenging situation. And so overnight Sunday on January 5th, freezing rain and ice is what we got. And once that is on, it's hard to keep that from getting on the ground, particularly when it's freezing rain, because if we treat the roads, then that precipitation oftentimes knocks the treatment off the roads. Then once it's down, it's hard to get rid of. In fact, we still have some things on the ground, some snow and ice that is lingering from last week, and that would have been January 5th. In fact, on my way in to do the podcast, I had to put air in my tire because I had a flat due to the temperature conditions. We also had this past weekend on Friday night a recent snowfall of 3 to 4 inches locally in town. Again, talking about the difference between ice and snow, the snowfall actually served to provide some traction to the icy spots that have been lingering. Unfortunately, we had a warm up there and the snow was melted and we're back to ice again. So, we ask folks to be patient with our crews. We have some experience overall in the organization working with this, but ice is a different critter entirely. And fortunately for us, we don't deal with it very often, but when we do, it's a different situation. Also, on an administrative note, last night I reported that town offices will be closed on Monday, January 20th, in observance of both a state and federal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In response to a question from council last night, there will be a budget retreat amongst council members on Saturday, February 22nd. Our budget cycle runs from July 1st to June 30th, but we're in the time of year where we have to develop our work plan and get that to council for their review right now, and staff is in the process of doing that. We will present that to council at that retreat in February. Moving on into the agenda, we had one appearance before council last night. Ms. Erica McFadden, who is the manager of the Bedford Farmers Market, gave an overview of market activities both during the previous year and kind of gave some operational details of what happens there. For folks who are not familiar, the Farmers Market facility on Washington Street is owned by the town. We don't have a staff that actually operates that facility. We make that available to other folks who are focused on doing that, and it just so happens that Ms. McFadden is part of an organization that has now been doing that for 6 years. They secure the facility through our facilities use policy, and they reserve it on certain dates, and she explained all that. Again, want to thank our partners, Media Squatch, for both this podcast, also broadcasting live our meetings, and providing YouTube backup of that. Ms. McFadden gave some really good information about the market last night, and if you were not at the meeting or you didn't watch the meeting, I would encourage you to look it up on YouTube and get some better details about that very interesting and lively operation on Washington Street. We then moved to council comments, and newly elected Councilman Dave Foster thanked those people who were in attendance. We did have, probably at least a couple of dozen folks with us in the audience last night at Town Hall. Councilman Dwight Evans also thanked people who were present, and he expressed his appreciation to the town staff and for their efforts in dealing with road conditions. Let me pop back to that for a minute as well. When we do have winter events, our primary mobilization with Public Works is to get the streets clear. Then, as we're able to, we try to address sidewalks in the Centertown area. Now, that's also a little bit complicated by the fact that there's some question about where the public right-of-way exists and where it does not. We do ask folks to help us out with sidewalk maintenance, and there is code language requiring that. But again, what we try to do is manage that, I'm going to say in a common sense way, to make sure it's done safely and efficiently. Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, in his comments, thanked the electric department for quickly restoring power during an outage which occurred on Monday, January 6th. That was somewhat related to the weather event we had, but in that event, if you live in the northeastern quadrant of town, you may have experienced an outage of about 2 or 3 hours. We had a transformer that failed, and our electric staff were able to respond very quickly to that. Again, this is another good time to remind you of our operational philosophy with our electric department. Our 3 areas of focus in providing electric service are reliability, affordability, and independence. The reliability aspect comes in when we have outages, and we'd love to tell you that's not going to happen, but given the nature of our infrastructure, it does occur. We pride ourselves on the fact that if your power goes out, we're going to do everything we can to get it back quickly and as soon as possible. And we're able to do that because we have a focus area on the town and our service territory, whereas some of our neighboring utilities have much greater responsibilities, and it takes them longer to get things back. Of course, affordability is an issue, and we are addressing that by having an independent consultant review our costs and what we charge our customers. And independence is a goal of ours. We still purchase most of the power we provide to our customers on your behalf from outside sources. We're doing what we can to generate as much of that so we have control over that operation, but the primary means in which we do that currently are our hydroelectric plant on the James River at Snowden and a solar generating facility at our closed landfill facility off of Orange Street. Obviously, during the snow event, we weren't generating a lot of solar power. Our hydro plant is dependent on the nature of the James River itself. It's not a matter of impounding water like AEP does at Smith Mountain Lake and then using it. We only generate power when the river is flowing and at a certain level. So wanted to provide that level of explanation in conjunction with Councilman Updike's comments. Councilman Stacey Haley also thanked staff, and in particular Tom Woodard, the Public Works Director, and John Wagner, the Electric Director, and their colleagues for their efforts during the weather event. Councilman Todd Foreman also thanked those who were present and noticed that we lost a prominent citizen this week, Mr. Pee Wee Carter, who has been very active in the community in a number of ways, including service on the volunteer fire company. Mr. Carter passed away, and Councilman Foreman extended his condolences to the family as well as on behalf of the town. Councilman Jay Ippolito also thanked those in attendance and said he appreciated that, and also made a point that we appreciate public comment and input at all times, and we appreciate Councilman Ippolito making that statement. And he also thanked Ms. McFadden for her presentation regarding the farmers market and her efforts there. Newly elected Mayor C.G. Stanley echoed the comments and thanked all departments involved in recovery from the snow and ice events. He also noted that in addition to keeping the roads clear and passable, Public Works simultaneously operated our curbside solid waste collection service. We did actually get some questions about that, and some people, frankly, may disagree with the priorities, but we try to provide every level of service that you should reasonably expect at all times and in all conditions. And in addition to keeping the roads clear, Public Works actually was out there collecting trash for the folks who were able to get it out to the curb before it got too icy. Mayor Stanley, I got to get used to that as well, and I know CG is too. Also noted the committee assignments for other council members and advised them that he's made those appointments. There were no revisions to the agenda. Last night we had 2 public hearings. The first was for a conditional use permit basically related to construction of a gymnasium at Bedford Primary School under the direction of the Bedford County School Board. The public hearing was opened by recognizing the school board's agent, and that was Mr. Scott Beasley of Hurt and Profit. He gave a brief presentation regarding the specifics of the proposed new gym at the primary school. A lot of questions about whether that would impact traffic and parking. There are a lot of after-hours events that happen in conjunction with schools. Mr. Beasley basically stated that the construction of the gym should not impact. There won't be much change in the after-hours use that people have come to experience. Ultimately, the gym replaces what has affectionately been known through the years as the Cafe Gymnatorium. For folks who grew up and attended Bedford Primary School or had children there, as I did, you're probably familiar with the fact that the cafeteria also functioned as the gymnasium for physical education and events, as well as an auditorium for PTA presentations and seasonal get-togethers. The gym facility has been something that's been discussed for a long time in the community, and we do appreciate the school board in being able to move forward with that. There were no other speakers at that public hearing, so Mayor Stanley closed that one. We then had a second public hearing related to various zoning ordinance changes related primarily to homestays, and that relates to Airbnbs or VRBOs, if you're familiar with that use. as well as digital signage, and then a few other issues within the zoning ordinance that represented some cleanup matters. There were no people who arrived to speak at that public hearing, so that one was closed, and we moved forward with new business. And in a constant theme of new people in leadership positions, Mr. Stacy Wills was recently elected by the membership of Company 1, that being the Bedford Fire Department, to serve as chief, along with a new slate of officers on their board of directors and their leadership. Under town code, technically, the fire chief is specifically tied to the town organization in that the council is required to appoint the chief on an annual basis. They do pretty much follow the recommendations of the company elections on that. And the fire chief functions as a department head in that he does work under the general direction of the town manager. But he also has a direct connection to the town council that's somewhat unique. And also, the chief of Company 1 interacts with the county management and emergency management staff in a different manner than other department heads. So the government structure, in case anybody's interested, is town council employs me as town manager to effectively carry out their policies and the codes and ordinances that they adopt, and to manage staff. And it's my responsibility to hire and oversee all department heads, who then hire and oversee their employees, with the notable exception of the fire chief, who is appointed directly by council as part of town code. Council performed their ministerial action last night to do that, and Mr. Stacy Wills, who was elected by the company back in December, has now been officially appointed and is serving as the fire chief for the town of Bedford. Chief Wills gave a bit of a background report on what the department's been up to, as well as a document which he handed out to town council identifying their priorities within the next 5 years. We do appreciate the service of former Chief Todd Stone, who did that for a couple years previously, but we want to congratulate Chief Wills and extend our best wishes to him and the fact that we look forward to working with him in the future. The next item of new business dealt with action on the actual conditional use permit for the Bedford Primary School. Again, the school is a facility that's owned and operated by the county and by the county school board, but it is subject to local zoning regulations, and it's a matter where the school is located in a residential area, which is somewhat unusual. Nowadays, those schools are typically sited in non-residential areas. So since Bedford Primary is within a neighborhood, they had to receive permission from council in the form of a conditional use permit to add the gymnasium. A lot of the concerns expressed there, again, in council's discussion of the matter, related to after-hours events and impacts on traffic and parking. In addition to Mr. Beasley from Hurt and Profit, Principal Lisa Dellis was present, and she fielded some questions. Not going to go into too many details there. Again, if you want to follow us on YouTube and follow the discussion there, I would encourage you to do so. Ultimately, council did vote unanimously to grant the conditional use permit as recommended by the Planning Commission. That recommendation was also unanimous. And so for future generations and future students of Bedford Primary School, they will have a facility for physical education that has not been in place up to this point. So again, that is something that was pursued and is being enacted by the Bedford County School Board. And for those of you who are interested in such things, you might want to make a point to thank them if that's something that you were certainly in favor of. The last remaining item of new business were the several matters of zoning ordinance amendments. Those were kind of broken up into three categories. The first dealt with regulations of homestay use. And when we say homestay, again, we're talking about Airbnbs and vacation rental by owner type situations, not bed and breakfast, oddly enough, which are a separate category in zoning. Zoning is a fascinating process to anybody that is involved in its administration, but it's probably aggravating and complicated for everybody else. So last night represented a lot of housekeeping work that was done by Planning Director Mary Zirkle, as well as the members of the Planning Commission. The zoning ordinance was completely revised back in March of 2024, but this issue of homestay use was something that was kind of lingering. One of the main issues was the minimum age for someone to be eligible to rent a home through VRBO or Airbnb standards. The previous language had identified 18 as being the age of consent to be able to do that. After discussion, the Planning Commission recommended increasing that to 21 years. So, again, in the zoning where an Airbnb may be allowed, anyone who would intend to use that has to be a minimum of 21 years of age. There was also some clarifying language about the specifics of the ability to rent an entire house or to break up rental of houses into different units. 4 was the metric that was quoted last night. And Planning Commission tightened up language to prevent that from happening. Basically, we recognize the trends in the real estate market towards VRBOs and Airbnbs, but the zoning ordinance has to parallel that, and that was the proposal of the Planning Commission. The next item that was covered in the kind of blanket series of amendments was digital signage. Again, this is a relatively new technology within the last 15 to 20 years. We've probably seen those in other places. The issues there relate to glare. They relate to the interval at which the signs change. And the concerns there, frankly, relate to driver safety and also pedestrian safety. Planning Commission has historically also had concerns about how those blend in with historic areas and has historically avoided allowing those in our Centertown area. They did come up with some changes to digital sign regulations, which allow them to be used more broadly. However, I will note they're still not permitted within the B1 or Centertown issue. Again, the changes they recommended related to the speed limits for the adjoining roads where these signs will be located, as well as the interval rate at which these would change or flash. Beyond that, when these ordinance was rewritten and adopted in March 24, there were a couple of uses that were inadvertently omitted, mainly car washes and automotive repair uses, and some definitions and clarifying language that the Planning Commission worked to address and recommended approval of those changes. Ultimately, last night, Town Council did adopt all of the changes, which will now be incorporated into our zoning, and we feel like our zoning ordinance is now more reflective of what we feel are the most recent trends in both technology and land use. After the conclusion of new business last night, Town Council did have a closed session with legal staff regarding a matter related to an incident at the county scale house back in the summer, which relates to an insurance claim and some complications there. Once council came out of closed session, they then adjourned until January 28th at 5 o'clock p.m. for a work session in the conference room, followed by a conflict of interest training in Council Hall. So the next meeting of council, the regular meeting, will begin at 7 o'clock p.m. on January 28th, but council is taking the opportunity to do some administrative work and discussions on their own prior to that. This is similar in manner to what our colleagues at Bedford County do as well, if folks are familiar with that operation. As always, we certainly appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we work to provide our level of service. We do want to hear from you. If you have questions or comments, we're happy to receive those. We may not always give you the answer you want, or maybe sometimes the answer is we can't do what you want right now, but we do receive the input and it is always considered. If you're a fan of the winter weather, I wish you great enjoyment of that. Hopefully we won't have things that impact our lives or quality of lives too much in conjunction with that. And we will make it through without too many perils or hazards to health or property. Till I join you next time, I thank you for your attention to this podcast. Again, we encourage you to get in touch with us by phone at Town Hall. That number is 540-587-6001. You can contact me directly by email at bwarner@bedfordva.gov. And again, my name is Bart Warner. I have the privilege of serving as your town manager. And until next time, I wish you much health and happiness. Thank you for tuning in.